All right, well, we've gotten to just about 2 minutes past the hour, and I don't want to take away much time from the presentation that we have today. So I will just briefly welcome everyone, and then we can jump in on the presentation while folks are still logging on here. But for those of you that weren't on early, my name is Amanda Prater, and I am the coordinator on BIO's Alliance Development Team. Welcome to today's Advocacy Lab webinar. It's the second webinar in our series. BIO, really values our patient advocates and our CSBA members, and we're just so pleased to be able to bring you this fantastic series. Given today's environment, the work that you all do has never been more important, and we are just so thrilled that we can kind of add this as a tool in your toolbox for the efforts that you all are working on. On behalf of Michelle Oshman, who is our VP of External Relations, who unfortunately will have to join us a little bit late today, I want to thank you all for the work that you do, and thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for our webinar. We are thrilled to be working with the Beekeeper Group. Beekeeper is an award-winning agency specializing in communications and has experience working with nonprofits and associations on various digital advocacy campaigns. Alex Dickinson of the Beekeeper Group will moderate today's session. She is Vice President and Chief of Staff at Beekeeper, and she uses her background as a content and messaging strategist to shape the unique perspective and Beekeeper approach. So Alex, I will turn it over to you to lead the session.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda. I am really looking forward to talking to you all today about the art of strategic content mapping and also how to craft a digital campaign plan in 60 minutes. I would welcome questions throughout the conversation today. If you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll also leave space at the end of the conversation for chat. One last housekeeping, as you sign on, make sure to stay on mute here. Very excited to hear everyone's perspectives and angles, but we all know by this point in time in COVID-19 world, the power of the mute button. So let's get started. We are talking about crafting a digital campaign plan in 60 minutes, and it's sort of an interesting framework for this. When we talk about crafting a campaign plan in 60 minutes, we actually mean giving you the tools so that you can craft a campaign plan in 60 minutes. We're also going to cover this in about 60 minutes as well, hopefully a little less, but just wanted to give you that framework. So it's ideally a 1-to-1 ratio of you getting trained on how to build these digital campaign plans and then you having the power to execute one in 60 minutes or less. Building a campaign is one of the most effective ways that you can move people to action online. It's a really concentrated approach to delivering an action, and some of the tactics and ideas that we're going to explore and talk about today are specific ways to help you map your narratives, identify your audiences, and deliver truly focused messages and deploy tactics to audiences with those messages that really resonate and help move people to action. And I promise by the end, you will be amazed at how much you can accomplish in 60 minutes. So let's look at a couple of the other things we're going to discuss today. We're going to define a campaign. Campaigns mean different things to different people, and there's a lot of preconceived notions that go into a digital campaign in particular, and I want to demystify a little bit of that. We're going to talk about some of the assets that you need to craft a digital campaign, so what you need to pull together, who you need in the room, and how you need to go about structuring that overall approach. And we're also going to, again, emphasize a couple easy hacks to help you put it all together. One of the fun exercises that I love to do with this overall approach is based on human-centered design, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I'll walk you through a couple steps in a fun interactive group activity, but I won't make you all do the group activity part today. All right, let's get started. So what is a digital campaign? When you think about digital campaigns, you may think about times where you have seen a bunch of hashtags circling around on Twitter, or maybe you've seen a number of different images posted on an Instagram channel that look like they're one and the same. The concept and idea, of course, is that you are moving people to action. You are figuring out who you want to reach, and you are getting them to figure out what you want, and you are figuring out what you want them to do, and you're moving them to that action. So overall, when you're talking about campaigns, you're talking about an integrated approach to communicating with an audience about a topic or event to convince them to do something. It is very action focused. You really want to think about what is the end result here? What's going to be different at the end of the process? When you're talking about an always on campaign, which is something that a lot of people like to explore, you're talking about something that may be pushing things longer term. Those are always relevant, always important. It's a little different than what we're looking at here. We're talking about really discrete events, really discrete moments. You've got a bill that you want to advocate for. You have a petition that you want to get signatures for. You have some sort of action with an endpoint or a discrete time period that you're focusing on. Of course, as I mentioned just a moment ago, you want to focus on an action. Campaigns are all about getting people to take an action. Of course, we think about the term and the word campaign in the political context a lot, and that action, of course, would be voting. You're thinking about this in terms of broader actions where you can get your constituents, your audiences, whoever you're trying to tap into to do something on your behalf. Campaigns have a specific audience. And I think this is something that people get lost in a little bit in the digital world. When you are exploring who you want to reach, you have to have someone in particular in mind. You have to be able to understand and define who this person is, and not just who they are, but where they are online. And we'll look through a couple ways that you can actually go about that process. Another key component to campaigns that I really love to emphasize is that campaigns end. They are not these ongoing elements. They have an end point. And one of the benefits to them having an end point is that you can glean and learn a lot from the end of a campaign for your next campaign. You can think about a overall push on a topic, an overall push on an issue as being a months-long, years-long endeavor, and you can have multiple campaigns in there, but you can think about this as the chapters in your book and the moments that you can build on from your last learnings. And finally, another really important point with campaigns is that they aren't only online or offline. And many of you may have started to think about campaigns in the digital world as just being tactics that are happening in Twitterverse or on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and it's easy to go that route. It's easy to think about anything that's happening on this box that you're looking at me through as being online. But the important thing to remember is that the online actually doesn't mean very much without the offline. And effective campaigns really consider and explore the idea of moving these two concepts together. I like to consider this offline campaigns, online campaigns, and really what you're looking to do is an inline campaign. You want something that's going to be able to integrate and understand that the person that you're trying to reach is a person. It's someone with an opinion, a perspective, a view, and you want to convince them to take an action. Which is why as you're designing and building a digital campaign, you want to remember that it should have a real world return on investment. That means that any action that you are proposing, any campaign that you're doing is going to make a big difference for you offline as well. That may seem pretty straightforward, but it's worth emphasizing that if you go through the entire process of building a campaign plan, you invest a lot of energy and effort in social media, and you don't get anything out of it offline, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And you could be doing more. The value of a campaign plan is really interesting and important to consider too. Many of you are likely very busy individuals who have a lot of initiatives that you're focusing on and a lot of ideas that you want to get out there into the world. And one of the true ways that campaign plan processes can help you is to get everyone aligned. Because although you may be championing a cause, I would venture a guess that people at your organization also have perspectives on that campaign. Most of the time people are working to build coalitions, or they're working to build in and integrate a lot of different ideas and concepts, and this process is designed to try and get everyone on the same page. It's also a way, as someone who project manages a lot of things, campaign plans are really, really useful and helpful ways to help you delegate work and help you become a force multiplier as opposed to just the person doing the work. It's also a way for you to see if you are missing any parts of a campaign. And I'm going to show you a model in a moment here that we're going to build at the very end. But the idea is that you have a good way to see what's happening out there. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone really quickly. All right, perfect. The idea is that it's a way for you to see the map and understand where you might have some gaps and where you can fill those gaps in. So what do you need to build a campaign plan? Let's take a look at what a campaign plan ends up looking like. This is the output of a 60-minute campaign plan. You'll see a goal up here, audiences over here, narrative over here, and messages and tactics layered in. This is something that Beekeeper Group has built with over the course of the past 10 years, and we've worked with a lot of clients to actually do a lot of fun processes to build out these approaches and these matrices. They can get really, really big. They can be much smaller than this too. But when you go through the process, you're able to see, oh, maybe I'm missing a message over here. Maybe I'm missing a tactic in this area. And that's the approach that you want to be considering here. But before I get into the details of this, let's take a number of steps back and talk about the basics and the foundational components of a campaign plan online. So your tools for success, you have to have a goal. You have to know what the end goal is that you have in mind is. You have to have a strategy. We'll talk about the difference between a goal and a strategy in a moment as well. You have to have your audience. You have to have a narrative. And a narrative is actually the story that you want to tell. It's the approach to telling your story, and it's the way that you can organize your messages. Underneath that narrative, you want to have specific message points that, again, align over to audiences and align into different parts of a narrative. And you also want to have those proof points, and that's those data messages, those data points. And one of the important elements to remember there is facts actually aren't enough to convince people to take actions. When you're building into people's frames that they have in their mind, facts don't actually move people. It's the stories, it's how things fit into their worldview that actually convinces them to take an action. Of course, there's tactics. Tactics are the fun part. Tactics are the part that most people get really excited about at the beginning of a campaign. And when it gets time to press go, they're like, oh, geez, do we have everything we need for this? So that's why tactics are actually pretty far down on here. And of course, there's timeline, which is part of your goal as well, but understanding how you space everything out and having the resources and approvals. A quick note on approvals here. I find a lot of times when I'm working with clients or when I'm working with groups and they are starting through this campaign process, they will get pretty far. They'll have a bunch of different inputs. They'll have everyone's different perspectives and angles, and they'll say, okay, we're ready. And then they realize that they have to get 3 other people's perspectives on it. They have to get more people's inputs. So understanding ahead of time where those layers of approval and who's going to have to buy into this project can make a really big difference. Just as with any project that you'd be managing offline or not in the digital world, it makes a big difference for social media campaigns too. Finally, of course, you want to keep it simple. So a great way to think through what this process looks like is to consider your goal. Your strategy is something that is sort of an arrow directing you through this process. The design, which is actually less the actual creative assets and visuals and more the plan that you're putting together, more how you're structuring everything. The actions, of course, the main action that you want people to take and the little tactics that move people to take those actions. And finally, measurement. When we were talking about that merged offline and online campaign and what it means to have an inline campaign, we talked about needing a real world return on investment, which means that you have a solid measurement, that you have something specific that you're going to be measuring, that there is a definition of that success. So when we're talking about goals, you're talking about what's going to be different at the end of your campaign. What's going to change? It's you've defined ahead of time how you can understand and how you can conceptually share you've succeeded. The strategy is the direction. And this is important because strategy, tactics, and goals often get confused. And when we're thinking about it in the campaign context, it's important to think about strategy as how you're going to get someplace. An analogy that I love to talk about is you're building a bridge. So let's say you're on one side of a river and you want to get to the other side of the river. Your goal is to get to the other side of the river. Your strategy is to build a bridge. The audience, the people who you need to get to build that bridge with you, the narrative is the story of you building the bridge, how you decided you wanted to build the bridge, and how you got over to the other side of the river eventually, and what a difference it made. The messages and tactics are convincing people. Tactics might be getting the resources that you need. And the timeline is saying by when this bridge will be completed. And then that is the overall story that you have to move people to action there. And of course, the actions are not just the big action, but the small actions and tactics too. A couple important considerations here. You need to remember 3 main elements: your bandwidth, your budget, and your scope. This is true of, again, not just social media campaigns and not just the digital world, but helpful reminders that do make a big impact, especially when you're talking about putting paid advertising in, or when you're talking about what kind of approach you want to take. So you need to remember, do you have the capacity to support the proposed plan here? Is the plan you have going to actually satisfy the needs of all the constituents, of all your stakeholders? What do you have the capacity to support? What's your minimally viable product there? Have you defined your scope? So when you're thinking about scope, that's where the actual having a written plan makes a big difference. It says, I know that I'm trying to get to this one goal, and I have a lot of different actions and tactics that are in there, and I know because I got this written up and approved in a plan that I'm able to move forward with this. And do you have the means to get additional help? So that is both a budget consideration. Do you need to talk to an outside vendor? Do you need to talk to, do you need to spend some money on ads? Do you need to do some design work? Keeping those elements in mind and not too far out of the front of your mind is really important. And finally, another really, really important consideration is that social media is free like a puppy is free. This is a quote from one of the partners at Beekeeper Group, Mike Panetta, and I absolutely adore it. I think it is exactly the correct viewpoint to be going into a social media campaign. You think you walk down the street, you see a sign for free puppies, you go, you get the puppy, it's very cute, it's very adorable, and all of a sudden you have to get it some food. All of a sudden you have to train it. All of a sudden you have to take it out for walks, you have to play with it. It becomes a big time commitment. In a lot of ways, social media is the same way. You can get an account, you can put things out there, but if you aren't training it, it's not going to really, it's going to misbehave. Your audiences might get out of hand, things might get a little crazy. If you don't feed it, it's just going to not succeed. It's just not going to be doing anything out there. You have to have the energy and time and resources to invest in social media campaigns because they are free like a puppy is free. All right, let's talk a little bit more about goals. When I work with a lot of companies, they often struggle with defining different kinds of goals. I've seen goals defined in all of these different ways. This is an example actually taken from Save the Children, and I think it's a really unique and interesting idea for how you can decide how you want to structure a goal and how you want to define what your successful goal is. So I won't go into all the details here, but some top level ways you can think about it: as a goal, as an objective, as a key performance indicator, a KPI, as a strategy, although I encourage you not to think about it in that way. Some people think about the goal as the tactic itself or as the metric. Generally, I try and drive people to thinking about their goals as the where to, what's the end result here. A couple questions that you can ask yourself when you're trying to define your goal. Let's say you've got a big campaign in mind, you have an idea that you want to move forward with. You want to start getting really specific. So questions you should consider: who are you trying to reach? What do you want them to do? Those are, of course, the two most basic ones. But after you start to get into those definitions, you can explore where you want them to do it. Is it going to be something that's going to make sense on LinkedIn? Is this audience actually primarily on YouTube? ask those kind of questions when you're thinking about the where. When do you want them to do it by? And how can digital help you? If you go through all of those questions and it truly seems like this is not something that is a digital only campaign or a digital first campaign, you may need to consider bringing in other stakeholders or decide maybe this isn't the angle that I want to be taking this from. But this is important for any digital campaign. Let's say you have the wonderful opportunity of being given a budget and someone says, run some campaigns with this, or we have a big overall idea and we need you to do something. If you're in that bucket, I am very envious of you. That's a great way to be. But if you need an idea, you should start thinking through your top organizational objectives. Think through what barriers exist to your overall digital approach. And also think about what stakeholders can help you. And what I mean by that is when you start to look around you, if you have the means and capacity and scope to do a campaign, but you don't know where you want to focus, look at the rest of the room. Look at the rest of the people who might be doing work in this area and identify if there are gaps there or ways that you can actually help them and be a force multiplier yourself. And of course, most importantly, ask yourself, what does success look like for this amazing gift that I have right now? What do I need to do to actually build a goal? And then once you have an idea there, then you can go into those you've got an idea questions. This is a framework, and I should have mentioned this before, but as a follow-on from this conversation, you'll be getting a number of these slides in a PDF format, and this one is one of those. This is a framework that will help you identify if you are in that fun area of you don't know what your you don't know what your campaign is going to be, but you have an organizational mission, and this can help walk you through that. So it helps you list through those objectives and challenges. It helps you think about the barriers that exist and what kind of tensions you may be facing. If it's a really high tension or you might have a lot of barriers, you may not go the digital route, you may go a different route. What stakeholders can help you achieve or can you help achieve, and describing what success looks like, of course. Once you've filled out this overall approach and once you've defined those objectives and ideas, you can map them against this overall chart. And the idea here is that you are considering how important is this to my organization? Is it something that is going to make a big difference for us? Is it something that we really want to be associated with? And on the other side, how much of an impact can you make? How much of an ability do you actually have to engage? And that's where those three gears of bandwidth and scope and budget come into play there too. You really want to understand what's your capacity, is what you have enough, and are you going to be able to push that forward? If it's something that is really important to the organization and will make a big impact, then it's definitely worth engaging. If it's something that isn't very important and you won't be able to make a big impact, then it's something you may want to consider. So as we move through here, another way to approach structuring your goals is to actually explore some ideas that are coming out of human-centered design. So human-centered design is a practice that's really popular in Silicon Valley, and I urge you to Google it and look into it in much more detail than I'll be able to go into here. But one of the core ideas is that you are solving problems with the people who you are trying to solve the problems for in mind. So it's not just big organizational problems, it's really patient-centered problems, it's human-centered problems. And these are some goal questions and some ways that you can structure your overall approach to actually focus really tightly in on who you're trying to reach and understanding how you can build everything from there. So one of them is, how do I get who, what to do, what by what time? So simply plugging in little elements and words there can help you come to a really solid goal. And how might we help people? So again, thinking about the people who you're focusing in on here. Need verb, so some sort of strong verb that articulates the satisfaction of a need of some sort in a way that reinforces or establishes or aligns with a value that you as an organization have. And let's go on to audiences here. So When we are talking about an audience for an online campaign, we have to remember that there's no such thing as the general public. The worst thing that you can do in a campaign is target the general public, because what it means is that you're not targeting anybody. You actually aren't focusing in on people who will move your campaign to action. That might be an effective approach for an always-on campaign. It might be an effective approach for a really, really large budget approach. But when you are talking about hyper-focused digital efforts, you really want to make sure that you are hyper-focused and you know who you are trying to reach here. Some questions to help you explore and dig a little bit deeper into who you're trying to reach. Basic ones: where are they? So if you know who they are, if you have an idea of who you want to convince, where are they, what do they do, and who are the influencers in their sphere? Who are the people who they listen to? A process that we go through a lot is actually building and developing personas and approaches to our audiences and audience profiles. It's a really fun practice that a lot of people in marketing end up doing, but I really recommend it for advocacy too. Building an advocacy profile or an advocacy persona can help you know a lot more and put yourself deeply in the shoes of the people you're trying to communicate with. On the other side, if you know what you want, but you don't necessarily know who you have you written down who you think the person is? Or who you think if this person exists, what they might be doing for you? Do you have people that you can talk to? Again, are there stakeholders who can reinforce or shape your approach? And are there competitors that you can consider? One thing it's important to remember in the digital space, your competitors are much different than the competitors you may have in the offline world or in the daily market world. Your competitors are people who are going to be taking up the energy and space and the breadth of people's inboxes, people's Twitter feeds, people's Facebook feeds. We talked about this a little bit in the last webinar when we talked about emails and how you're actually competing for attention across a lot of different ideas and a lot of different concepts. And you have to remember that if you're going to be reaching people and you're going to be getting people to take a specific action, you have to know that you aren't the only person talking to them. But on the flip side, exploring and who is reaching them and who is talking to them as well can really help you define your audiences. A couple other questions that I really like to explore, especially when I'm considering building those deeper audience personas. The idea is, of course, that you are trying to move a person to action. It doesn't necessarily need to be moving that person from being unhappy to happy, but it can be moving someone to make a change or to take some sort of effort on your behalf. So why is this stakeholder relevant to your campaign? One of the most important things that you need to keep in mind. When we look at that map again in a couple slides, I'll remind you that you should tier out your audiences. You should focus on audiences in different ways because some audiences are going to have a different relationship to your idea and your approach than others. For example, let's say you are trying to get a bill passed through Congress. You might want to be applying specific pressure to committee members, and those legislators would be your top tier audience. Those are the people that you are trying to move to action. The tactics that you might be taking with them would be tweeting at them, sending video messages to them, signing a petition. But at the same time, there might be an audience beneath them that would be influencing them, and that's going to be their constituents or other groups that might be able to support and help you. So again, remembering that there are different kinds of audiences that have different relationships with you, and understanding what is this audience's relationship to me, and how can I focus on them in building this campaign plan. What are the key message points for the stakeholder? What do they find persuasive? If you know that ahead of time, you're pretty ahead of the game, honestly. But really spending a little bit of energy and effort thinking through, okay, what's going to convince someone to take an action? How can I move this person? If you don't have that already, this is a really helpful exercise to go through when you are actually trying to figure out what's going to persuade them to action. It gets a lot of the wisdom in the room out. Who do they regularly listen to? How and where can you engage with this stakeholder? One challenge that I know with a lot of my biosciences and health clients is they're working with they're trying to reach patients and they are working through a couple different barriers and challenges in targeting patients. You have to remember that you might have to target people in really creative and unique ways. Not every patient is going to identify publicly as a patient. Not every patient is going to consider themselves that to be a core part of their identity. So thinking through the psychology of, okay, where can I engage with them? How can I find them? Where will it feel natural for me to talk to them? And really digging in on that can be helpful. And how should you deliver this message to the stakeholder? So once you have defined who you're trying to reach and what those different layers of audiences are, really examining, okay, is it going to be the same impact for me to send an email to everybody on this list or to send a tweet to everybody, or do I need to do something a little more targeted? Do they need a little more of a nuanced message than someone else? All right, let's move on to narratives and tactics, which is my favorite part as a messaging strategist in particular. This is where I get the most excited in digital campaign building. When we're thinking about a narrative, I mentioned before that it's the story that you're trying to tell. This sounds like a lot of preamble, but I think the story is actually so important. The story is the thing that's going to sell people. It's the thing that's going to make someone feel that deep connection to you and feel that deep connection to your issue and decide and be motivated to take an action. So a narrative is actually a structured way to meet your goal. It's a helpful way for you to think about how you can get people engaged and what you can do to actually get them to take that deeper action. You want to really focus on cognitive ease versus cognitive strain when you're thinking about your narrative. And what I mean by that is make it really, really simple. Focus on ways that you can effectively communicate the core components. Don't get overly complicated. A lot of my policy friends and colleagues will spew out a lot of really, really excellent policy points that just don't really work online. So you want to think about things from that digital perspective. Think about it in little chunkable elements. Think about it in tweetable elements. What can you really get across in 280 characters? And consider your framing as well. Framing is a really unique and interesting concept that comes up oftentimes around election years. People start to think about political frames. Frames are actually much broader than that. I think people also sometimes think about frames as having a negative connotation. And what a frame really is, it's the worldview that you live in. It's your perspective, it's you as an individual, how you see everything and how you interpret and explore ideas. Leaning into people's frames is a really powerful way for you to move people to action. The job of an advocate, the job of you as an organization trying to get people to take an action is to align your message with your audience's worldviews, and then they'll do the work for you. You want to get them right up to the line so that they understand where you're coming from, and then you want them to take the action on your behalf. And that happens through worldviews and through frames. A good way to think about frames is the alphabet. So if you think about everything out in the world, it might be A to Z over here on the left. So you have the whole alphabet structured in this order, and you have this view that exists. Someone else's narrative and someone else's worldview might be very different from that. So you want to try and match your narrative and your approach to their worldview. So structuring and selecting the components that are going to be the most important for you to emphasize. It's not that you're negating or denying that those things exist, but that you're emphasizing key points and that you're structuring things in a certain way. Let's talk a little bit about the core parts of your narrative as well. So when I was mentioning that your narrative is a structured way to meet your goal, and it's a helpful way for you to think about getting people engaged, you want to think about it in these 3 points. The first one is that you want to be able to introduce your audiences to the basic information that they need to know. So what is going to be the immediate thing that's going to get them to understand, okay, this person's aligned with me, this person has the same worldview as me, and I'm interested in listening and hearing more. The second element is educating and persuading your audiences further. Again, that's all about walking them right up to the line, giving them the messaging points that will convince them and make them excited, and then giving them the tools to take that action on your behalf. And finally, you want to activate the audience and lead to a call to action. So you are structuring your narrative and your messaging with a call to action at the end. That action is some sort of thing that you want them to do. It's some sort of message that will get them excited, but it's not necessarily it's helping them understand how they play a role in there as well. And that's where it's important to frame tactics as well. So tactics, again, are the fun part. It's the ideas around, okay, let me get those tweets out here, let me make an infographic, it's the animations, it's the fun stuff. But it's important to remember that actions are just big tactics. So if you're trying to get people to sign a petition, you may have to do a lot of different tactics. And you might be thinking about as many different ideas as possible. It's not enough to just have one idea here. You have to get very creative and think through a lot of different approaches. And you can have many actions, again, in service of a campaign, and that is all dependent on your bandwidth. This is also the place where you can get the most inspiration and where people will be the most excited to share. So with all of that, let's talk about how you actually go about crowdsourcing and pulling all of this together. Now, if we were in person together, I would start handing out 2 stacks of Post-it notes right now, a blue Post-it note and a pink Post-it note. At this point in time in my career, I should probably just be a stakeholder at 3M because I have used so many Post-it notes for these exercises. You're going to see a picture of what it can look like in a moment here. So the idea of building a content map and using this structure and framework is that you have a simple way for you to elaborate and build on a plan together with relevant stakeholders. The idea is that you want to bring as many key people into the room as possible, and you have educated yourself as a strong digital advocacy practitioner, and you know that you need to have a strong goal, you know who your audiences are, you know what your message and your narrative is, and now you are here, you are trying to get as many ideas as possible. And you as that facilitator are equipped to answer any questions and keep people in line. But the idea is, again, trying to focus them on that human-centered design. So getting everyone in the room focused on solving a problem for your audiences, solving a problem for an audience with multiple audiences as well. So again, considering how do you structure this with one person or one group in mind. You want to come prepared in the room with your goal, your audience, and your narrative. You will then rely on the other people in the room for the messages and the tactics. Again, that's the part that most people get the most excited about anyways, so it ends up being a fun exercise for a lot of people. What you'll see there is a image of the Beekeeper Group office in Washington, D.C. in the midst of one of these brainstorms with 40 Post-it notes on one thing. Your pink Post-it notes are going to be your tactics. Your blue ones are going to be your messages. So understanding that the blue is like the water, moving people through. Those are the message points. And the pink are going to be the hot ideas, the tactics, the things that you want to get people to take an action on. Okay, so you're in the room, you've got your goal, you've got your audience, you've got your narrative, and you've got your Post-it notes. You've told everybody what the idea is. I recommend that you focus in for the purposes of this kind of exercise on these kind of goals. So structuring, again, your goals in this manner. It would not be fun to do this exercise and to walk through this without an example. So I am going to use a outside of the industry example to walk you through what this could look like. One thing that I did not mention earlier and that I haven't had included in any of my bios is that I am a huge Abraham Lincoln fan. I used to work at C-SPAN in a previous career, and I worked at American History TV, and I worked on Lincoln programming. So my Lincoln fandom runs pretty deep here. So for our example today, I'm going to talk about saving the penny, a iconic way that everyone is reminded of the power of Abraham Lincoln every single day. So there are actually a lot of people who are organizing and trying to get people to abolish the penny right now. So there is a Retire the Penny campaign that's out in the world. It gains traction every once in a while. And our goal today, as all of us here in this session, is to brainstorm and ideate around how do we prevent the penny from being retired? Or how do I get Americans to support an effort to save the penny in 2020? It's complicated, of course, this year, but why not? Let's throw in some complicated factors. Another way that you want to reframe that question and that goal to help it make it more specific for people: how might we help legislators prioritize saving the penny in a way that reinforces a sense of community? So if we are the penny pinchers, I don't know, I didn't come up with a good organizational name for us, and we are organizing and building a campaign around pennies, that would be what you're trying to do. Our goal as an organization is to perceive and understand that pennies are a part of community, that pennies reinforce a lot of value here. I understand that this is, you're going on a journey with me here, and I appreciate that you're doing that. So if you have any questions or ideas as we go through this, please feel free to jump in. So the idea of doing that second question there and making sure that you have both of those questions is that you get everyone in the room's mind jogged and thinking, okay, I know who I'm trying to reach here. I know what I want to do here. By posing and framing with these questions up at the top, you're going to prime people to come up with some really solid ideas. So the next thing is you structure some sort of either shared document or, if you are in person, a whiteboard of sorts, and you start to build these ideas. So this is what it ends up looking like. It would not have, obviously, the message and tactics lined in here, but you would have a solid goal up here. So whereas you have the question and structured goals to set people up, you know that you are trying to generate a spike in the conversation on the value of the penny. That's what you're trying to get everybody to do. You want to make sure when you're building the plan in this manner that up there, your digital goal is something concrete and measurable. Again, something that you can demonstrate that real world return on investment for you. So you move from this and you start to walk people through the audiences that you've selected. So we just have broadly some legislators here. Remembering, going back here, that your audience should be the decision maker you need to persuade. Let's say the Don't Retire the Penny people are really pushing a lot of quarters and nickels and dimes in here, and you really want to go hard on the penny. You need to focus right on those decision makers who are going to be our legislators in this instance. Then your second kind of audience would be an audience member who would influence the decision maker, someone who might be able to persuade them. And that third audience could be someone who could benefit from this push or this campaign, and it would benefit your objective overall. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that you're thinking about different kinds of audiences. Again, remembering what's the relationship that you have to the stakeholder here. You have a stakeholder in your goal, you have a stakeholder that you're trying to reach. And of course, when you are building campaigns, it's rarely as simple and straightforward as there's just one person you need to convince. There are a lot of people that you want to apply that pressure to, and that's very true online. So again, our campaigns, our sample audiences here are going to be legislators, charities like UNICEF for the Salvation Army, people who rely on getting change, and banks and bank employees. They are people who might be interesting advocates for us. There's a change shortage right now, and maybe they are trying to get more people to share their money and share their change. So this is, again, the pre-work. You walk in and you have listed out these audiences. By narrowing the audiences ahead of time, you have cut out a lot of the work. I do really encourage you to make sure that you do at least this part of the process before you get into the room with everyone, because people have a lot of opinions on audiences. You can start to add different audiences in, and actually that can be a gap that you start to identify, but at least having a couple selected ahead of time can cut out a lot of energy and effort. Finally, you then want to actually build your narrative. So you have your top level narrative up there. This is going to be for us. An overwhelming majority of Americans want to keep the penny. When they do surveys on pennies, there's never a point where less than 60% of the population wants to keep a penny. And that's going to be your introduction point. So that's reminding people and getting people to understand that they are part of majority here, that there are a lot of people who really care about this, and it's going to make them, they are a member of a community already. So that's, again, reinforcing that value of community. Charities thrive on pennies, and penny elimination doesn't actually end up saving us any money. The Don't Retire Penny people have some stern talking points on how eliminating the penny saves money, and we as the penny pinchers don't actually feel that that is an accurate reflection. So we want to have that as part of our narrative, and we might have those specific message points layered underneath. Finally, the penny doesn't need to retire yet, so don't force it to do so. And this is, again, a direct reflection on the competitor's messaging, the competitor's worldview, and you want to approach and make sure that you're acknowledging that. So once you are at this point, you instruct people to start to focus on the task at hand. You want to get them to brainstorm as many tactics as possible. I spend about 10 minutes at the beginning of these sessions doing that setup. So walking them through the goals, walking them through the goal questions, walking them through the audiences and the narrative, and then break into a solid 20 minutes of brainstorming as many tactics, brainstorming as many messages as possible, and then after that, getting people to come together. So after they have written out their messages and written out their tactics, then they start to actually physically map them on a board or in a shared document or using an online tool. You can then figure out where there's overlap and figure out where there are gaps. And then that means that once you have built this map and once you've understood where your gaps are, you can determine if those are gaps that need to be filled and make some really hard and important assessments about are these audiences that I actually need to be targeting? Are there additional audiences that I should have added in here? Are there key messages that would actually have been much better? And once you have built all of that and once you have all of that together, then you want to start thinking about focusing on your strengths. So what ends up happening a lot of times, so you would have a sheet that looks like this. People start to put things in. They'll start to then populate ideas and concepts. You've experienced a technical difficulty that often happens in this process, and you jump right back in. So you get people to have all of their tactics and all of their ideas listed out here. What ends up happening a lot in this process is that you have a lot of people talking about specific ideas or talking about sharing an infographic concept or sharing a toolkit or paid advertising campaigns. And you actually notice that you have a lot of gaps in that process. So the idea is that once you've looked at everything and you see all the different gaps, you know, okay, you know what, I don't actually have enough information about the messaging for banks and bank employees. I thought this was a good idea, but the people in the room didn't come up with any ideas. Maybe I need to reevaluate if that's the right audience for me. Similarly, you would look up at the top and see maybe you're missing messaging actually across all. And that's not a thing that you want. Oops. All right. Some additional considerations here. As you go through that process, I recommend that you spend about 30 minutes in the brainstorming mapping process. So it's about 10 minutes at the top doing the entryway, about 20 minutes of individual brainstorming of messaging and tactics, and then people start to actually put those messages and tactics on the map. And then from there, you identify the gaps and you have structured discussion around that. And that is how you build a campaign plan in 60 minutes. Most importantly, if you're going to do it in person or if you're doing it with Post-it notes in some sort of joint way, make sure that you have someone documenting it. There's a lot of energy that comes out of these sessions. They're really powerful, and you end up having a lot of fantastic as you make sure that you are building those ideas and those concepts, you want to re-emphasize that you are not losing sight of all the great insights of the people in the room. This is, again, another really excellent way that you can easily get buy-in from different stakeholders if you need to, and also get people excited about ideas. So that's documenting your plan, having a note taker, focusing on your strengths. That's, again, a really crucial consideration. You want to make sure to emphasize the core ideas there, thinking back to your scope, and making sure that you are measuring success. So evaluating after you've put the plan together, does every tactic really lead up to my KPIs? Does every tactic really lead up to that real world return on investment? And one of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten has been to actually create a lessons learned file for my digital campaigns. So after I've built these campaigns and put things out there, I can, when I'm planning my next campaign, I can go back and see what were the top level things that I learned last time. When you're working as an organization and you're communicating through your social channels, you are going to be cultivating and using the same audience. So having those insights can be really helpful. And that is everything. I'd love to open it up to a question or two here. The slides will be shared. Everything that's on here will be shared online as well, and as well as a PDF with those worksheets. So both the goal worksheet, some of the audience questions, and the actual campaign strategic map process. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. In the meantime, I will prompt us for our next session, which is going to be on July 23rd. And that is on DIY Advocacy Creative. So it's the actual design hands-on session where I will be joined by my colleague Casey Kinchelow, who's our creative director, and she will walk through a couple core ideas and concepts for design. For any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to the team at Bio, Michelle, Ashley, Barrett, and Amanda. Yep. And I'm really thankful to have had the opportunity to talk to you all today. And thank you for jumping back on after that technical glitch. Here for any other questions. Thank you so much. We will be sharing a survey in the chat here and also in an email follow-up, and would love to get your insights there as well. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Alexandra Dickinson, and would love to connect with you. Thanks all.